So let's talk about the rare book marketplace. It's been a while since I did a video on this, and I do apologize. It usually takes me years to sometimes circle through all the most popular antique and collectible collecting categories that I have to cover on this channel. If we were to compile a list right now of the hottest collectible markets in the overall trade, rare books would definitely be somewhere on that list. So it's not that I'm ignoring this market, it's just I have so many markets to cover in any given time that it takes me a while to cycle back. Those of you will recall many years ago, I think it was right around the pandemic, I did a video where I talked about a novice entering this market, allocating capital to this market, how they should go about it. Well, this is going to be really a follow-up to that video. I will link that original video in the description below. It's several years old, but it is still worth watching. The information in that video has stood the test of time. I want to be very clear. Now, if you are going to choose to allocate capital, invest, or even collect in this market, understand that whenever we talk about rare books, this is a mature and sophisticated market in the trade. This is unlike collecting comic books. I want to make that very clear. Why both those markets, rare books and comic books, do have similarities to a certain degree, they are entirely different. When we're looking at the market for rare books, it's more on the antique side of the equation. So there are a lot of high-profile auction houses and highly vetted dealers that cater to this market. Typically, though, I want to warn you, they cater to the high end. Meaning it's people that are coming into this market that have thousands, if not tens of thousands of dollars to spend on each item that they are going to be putting into their collection. So you have companies like Bauman's Books, which we are going to talk about in this video, that got famous through Pawn Stars. You also have high-profile auction companies like, of course, Heritage Auctions, Swan Auction Galleries out of New York, Potter & Potter Auctions out of Chicago, Illinois, that all cater to this market. So without further ado, we're going to dive right in. I'm going to start by giving you some key record-breaking sales that took place towards the end of 2025. So if we get my DeLorean time machine and we go back to November of 2025, Potter & Potter Auctions out of Chicago, Illinois, held a rare book sale. Now, this is a highly vetted auction house. Obviously, they are not as big as Heritage Auctions. I'm sure a lot of you out there, unless you play in this market, unless you're in the antique side of the trade, you probably never even heard of Potter & Potter Auctions. They do have a massive online presence, though. Well, they had a rare book sale, and there were some excellent science fiction classics that sold for a pretty penny in this sale. And I am going to go over some of these sales right now. Case in point, a first edition copy of Dune by Frank Herbert that was published in 1965 in fine condition with the dust jacket, sold for $24,000. Another science fiction classic, I, Robot, believe it or not, there was a movie made on this that is by Isaac Asimov that was first published in 1950. This first edition copy sold for $10,800. So you can see, if you're investing in high profile first edition copies of science fiction classics, this market is very popular right now. Moving on to Heritage Auctions, in December 2025, they also had a key sale geared towards rare books. Now, I am actually going to omit any book that sold in that sale for more than $100,000, and I'm just going to give you the highlights of what's left here. In December of 2025, through Heritage, a first edition copy of Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger sold for $25,000. A copy of Tender is the Night, first edition by F. Scott Fitzgerald. If you never read this book and you love The Great Gatsby like me, please seek this book out. You don't have to buy a first edition. You can get a current edition at Barnes & Noble or your favorite bookstore. This is a book well worth reading. I want to warn you, though, it is a story about love and loss and limerence. It is basically about a relationship that falls apart. Spoiler alert. If Great Gatsby caused you to cry, this book is also going to cause you to cry. Well, Tender is the Night by F. Scott Fitzgerald, a first edition copy, sold for $27,500, proving that F. Scott Fitzgerald is very bankable in the world of rare books. Another famous book that you may have heard of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck. A first edition copy sold for $23,125 in this same sale. And last but certainly not least, a first edition copy of Dracula, published in 1897, sold for $55,000. Now, what does this all mean? Well, again, if you're going to allocate capital to rare books, these are items that you're going to have to hold for a minimum of 10 years or more, usually to eke out a return, especially if you're buying at current market value. There are 3 categories, though, that you really want to invest in. First, of course, are the classic literature juggernauts, some of which I just named. These are books like The Great Gatsby, Gone with the Wind, Ethan Frome, Wuthering Heights, Grapes of Wrath. Any of these books that you may have been exposed to in literature class, whether it's in high school or college, if you can get a first edition copy that is in at least excellent, fine condition, you should do very well if you buy right. This is especially true if Hollywood steps in and actually makes a version of that book and brings it to the big screen, and it does moderately well. That automatically causes renewed interest in that book, in that author, in that piece of work. This is why in the year 2026, The Great Gatsby, which is now 100 years of age, is still selling for extreme sums at auction. Because if you recall, back in 2012, 2013, The Great Gatsby was brought to the silver screen, and it starred Leonardo DiCaprio as Great Gatsby himself. Well, that caused a lot of renewed interest in that work. And that work is still going strong to this very day. As a matter of fact, it has a universal theme. Most likely, if they really wanted it to, they could recreate that whole story and set it in the modern era, and it would still work. So that is something that I wish that a director would do. If they would take The Great Gatsby, pull it out of the 1920s and put it in the 2020s, it would actually still work. It's very interesting. When we look at classic literature with universal themes really has that effect where you can almost transplant the story and the characters to any time throughout history, and it should still work. That's what makes a lot of these books fascinating. That's what makes them well worth collecting and investing in, especially over the long term. Now, the second category of books that is really popular when we talk specifically about rare books are science fiction, horror, and fantasy classics. So if we're looking at The Lord of the Rings, if we're looking at, I already mentioned Dune, if we're looking at Frankenstein or Dracula, all these works are universal and extremely popular. They're well worth investing in if you buy right and you study the market. Now, of course, quick caveat here, there are no guarantees in any of these markets. You could literally take $20,000, do everything right, buy a rare book, hold it for 10 to 20 years, go to sell it at auction, and get smacked in the face with a stale donut. All of these markets are highly volatile. They're highly unpredictable. It's just like any other market that you may invest in. But there is more stability in a market like this that is more mature and sophisticated than, say, a highly volatile pop culture collecting category in the trade. So this is something that you got to understand when we start comparing antiques to that of collectibles. Remember, antiques are more cyclical. Antiques are basically rooted in history. When we look at pop culture collectibles, they're more linear. They're more rooted in nostalgia. So that's really how you got to look at these markets. Now, the third category that make up the rare book marketplace that you may want to look into are historically important books. Books like The Wealth of Nations or The Prince by Machiavelli, or even certain versions of the King James Bible. Some of those items have a lot of value on the secondary market. Now, this is where you have to use caution, because through my consulting business in the antiques and collectibles trade, I have a lot of high-profile doctors and lawyers that come to me. And some of these individuals do collect rare books. Obviously, if you're going after an extremely rare and valuable medical book or law book that was written hundreds of years ago, where very few have survived, but if the book comes up for auction or it sells through a dealer for tens of thousands of dollars, you have to be a little bit careful there, because it may not have as much demand as, say, a book like The Catcher in the Rye, or Tender is the Night, or The Great Gatsby, or Of Mice and Men. So you can kind of see the differences and similarities there. So if you're going after like a rare medical book or some nonfiction book where it is truly rare and scarce on the market and it does sell for tens of thousands of dollars, when you go to sell it, you may encounter resistance simply because there isn't a lot of demand in the market at that particular point in time for that book. That's why anytime we talk about historically important books or works of nonfiction, they always are number 3 on this list. Meaning if you're looking to invest in this market, my personal advice to you, assuming you really love classic literature or science fiction or horror classics, go after them first. Then, if you want to accent the collection with something like a rare historically important book or a piece of nonfiction that sells for an incredible sum, then buy that item and add it to the collection. But don't go all in on rare books that may be a very niche market, because when you go to sell, you may get slapped in the face with a stale donut. Now, some of the top auction companies and dealers that you're going to want to work with in this market, should you choose to enter it, should you have the means to enter it. Of course, you have Heritage Auctions, you have Potter and Potter Auctions. We also have Swan Auction Galleries, spelled SWANN, out of New York. And as far as dealers go, I do like Bauman's rare books. They were made famous through Pawn Stars, of course. The reason why I like Bauman's, and again, this is really a personal preference, they actually have several locations. They have one in Las Vegas, they have one in New York City, and believe it or not, they have one right in Philadelphia in Rittenhouse on Walnut Street, which is by appointment only, meaning you can't just walk in there. You actually have to call them and set up an appointment. I've actually been in that store at least 2 to 3 times, and I do love it. I will tell you, though, the prices are extremely high. Bauman's caters to a very high clientele. These are the people that have money. These are the people that want to go after the very best of the best, and they want to put the book away, usually not just for years, usually for decades. Sometimes they're building a collection that they're going to then, give to their kids or next of kin, and that collection is going to stay in the family for generations. So they have a lot of very wealthy clients. So what I will tell you is your best bet is to work with auction companies. However, that said, I would tell you also, if you are interested, to at least engage with top tier sellers like Bauman's Rare Books. Now, another interesting online website that I can give you is Abe's Books as well. Abe's Books, for the most part, isn't as expensive as Bauman's Books, but Abe's Books is more like a dealer network of smaller sellers that pretty much advertise their wares on that site. So interestingly enough, you can sometimes find deals if you go through Abe's Books versus either the auction houses or Bauman's, but it is hit or miss. You also have to understand that depending on who you're working with, their condition grading may not be as strict as yours. Whereas I can tell you firsthand, a lot of the auction companies, Bauman's Rare Books, if they tell you a book is in fine condition, 9 chances out of 10, actually 99 out of 100 chances, it's most likely going to be in fine condition. Now, to end this video, as promised, let's suppose that you are a collector on a budget. Let's suppose you're somebody, you don't have thousands or tens of thousands of dollars to allocate to one book, hold it for 10 to 20 years, and hope you eke out a return. If you want to start small in this market, there are ways to do it. Case in point, if you're a fan of Stephen King, Clive Barker, Dean Koontz, a lot of these authors that became hot in the 1980s, some of their earlier works, if they're first editions, they can still be bought for $1,000 or less, even in fine condition. Now, the one thing that you have to pay attention to, if you are going after like a first edition Stephen King classic, keep in mind that a lot of those books, as soon as he gained a lot of credibility in the horror genre, a lot of those first edition books were hoarded en masse. So of course, if you're going after an author that hit their stride in the 80s or even the 90s, there's going to be more first edition copies in existence in fine condition that are out there in the overall market than, say, that of an author like F. Scott Fitzgerald, who hit his stride back in the early 1900s. So you really have to look at the market from that paradigm, where there is still opportunity in a lot of these still living authors that we all covet, especially if you're into the horror genre. But just keep in mind, there's limited opportunity for some of these classics simply due to how much supply is out there in the open market. And I will tell you, if you're going after like a first edition copy of a Stephen King book, usually the earlier books are better. When you get to like Pet Sematary, Misery, books like that, at that point, he was already well established, where as soon as that book was published, there were people that were going to the market and they were literally putting away some of those first edition copies the minute they hit the bookstore. So just keep that in mind, guys. There is a market for that stuff, but you're really going to have to buy right, and you're going to have to hold it for the long term. It's not something that you're going to be able to flip directly into the market and make a profit, unless if you're going to like a thrift store or maybe a yard sale and you come across a first edition copy that's only selling for a couple of bucks. If it's selling under market value, you can flip it into the market and you can turn a profit right away. But again, you still have to know how to identify those first edition books. So if you really want me to expand more on this market, I can. Let me know in the comment section below. I hope that this at least helps you understand the dynamics of this market if you do choose to either collect or invest in this market. And as always, final caveat here, remember, there are no guarantees in this market. This video is not intended to provide direct investment advice. As always, if you are speculating or investing in any type of antique or collectible, you are taking a substantial risk. It doesn't matter what your favorite social media influencer or YouTuber tells you. Please understand, there are risks of speculating or investing in any type of antique or collectible. Thank you for watching. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. And just maybe, I will see you in another upcoming video.